you everyone for coming. So great to see all of you. I especially enjoy looking at all your hairs. So much individuality. We have this wonderful medium. You can just, it's so handy. You can mold it and do all kinds of crazy things. Show of hands, how many have ever colored their hair? Dyed it darker, bleached it lighter? Or maybe you were an original. Yes. And how many have ever curled their hair with a perm? Or straightened it with chemicals? Yes, or maybe soup cans, or even an iron? Yeah, we have all these possibilities. My hair, when I was very little, I had brown hair, and there was red, and there were streaks of blonde. It was this whole mixture, and it perfectly mirrored my multicultural background. My mother and father both came from the remote Cape Verde Islands, which are in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Senegal, and basically West African. My mother's parents were both Portuguese, but my father's mother was black and his father was French. So I had this whole mix. And I mainly took after my father, and I had his frizzy, kinky hair, we used to say. So my hair went through many, many changes, and if you were to ever look at early snapshots, you'd be able to tell where I was living, and even who I was living with. Dead giveaway. So it was such a strong presence that I sometimes thought of it as a separate being. Like, I even wrote verses to it. Your tangles teared my eyes. As stubborn as a stone, you would refuse the comb, a source of shame and hate. Why couldn't you be straight? So, from very early on, my hair was a painful experience. And my earliest memory, I'm 4 years old. My hair has been carefully curled in ringlets. And I'm wearing a brand new dress. I'm so proud of my new shoes. And I'm riding in the car with my mother, and a nice white-haired lady is driving us. She drives to a big wrought iron gate. And my mother takes me and walks me to the gate. She doesn't say anything, but she looks sad. And she gives me a great big hug. And then she walks back to the car. And the white-haired lady drives her away. The next thing I know, my new dress has been changed to a ugly khaki uniform. And they took away my new shoes and gave me ugly brown institutional shoes. And worst of all, I had to sleep in a jail of a crib. And then they cut off my curls and shaved my head to a bald scalp. Well, I painted this to remembering how I felt. I felt confused and abandoned and alone. And I felt a real indignity having to sleep in a jail of a crib. I'm 4.5 years old. I shouldn't have to sleep in a crib with bars. Well, there was no human contact except these very efficient clinicians who kept giving me shots and more shots and shots. And I'd never had shots before. And I found out much later that this was a processing center where children have to go first before they can be admitted to a more permanent home, which was called Sheltering Arms. And it was a home for children of broken homes. And basically for people like my mother, who was a single parent and struggling to make it during the Depression. And she had no options. She had to, the only job she had was a live-in maid. But I didn't know at the time. And I just felt very low, very sad. And I stayed much longer than the designated time. The plan was to get in, get processed, get out. But I developed a severe case of whooping cough and stayed much longer than the plan. Eventually, that very kind white-haired lady that drove my mother away whisked me away in the middle of the night after dark. And I found out that she was the director of the Sheltering Arms Children's Home. And so she took me there and immediately deposited me in the infirmary, where I remained in isolated quarantine for 3 months. Wow. Yes. When I finally recovered, I was able to join the other little girls my age, and I was happy for the company. But by then my hair had grown out and it was dry and shapeless, and I felt that I didn't fit in. My hair, there was no way that my bushy top was going to conform with the regulation bangs straight at the side, cut just below the ears. No. That my bushy top, it resembled more a mini afro, long before afros were fashionable. Well, I tried hard to fit in, and I was too young to know WASP, White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. But I just knew we did Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, and they read British classics at night when we lay in our beds that lined the big dormitory. The kindly house mother would read to us in the dark with her flashlight, and she would read David Copperfield, Anne of Green Gables. I kept looking for someone who looked like me, but I couldn't find him. Well, eventually, my mother was able to leave that live-in maid job, and she got a job in a sewing sweat factory doing piecework. And she was able to afford a tiny apartment in Hell's Kitchen, shared bathroom down the hall. But it enabled my brother and I to visit her on Sundays. I can still see her. She takes little cotton balls, dips them in hot olive oil, and vigorously scrubs my scalp. We've got to get rid of those African traces, she said. How are we going to pass with this frizzy kinkies? And it was like a mini torture, and I know she meant well, but the message I kept getting was, you're not okay. You've got to be altered before you can be okay. Well, she was very determined, and I remember overhearing her once talking to a friend, and she said, you know, I had to kidnap my 2 children when I divorced their father to escape his controlling ways. So she was a woman of determination. And she finally was able to move on up. When she got a job at Gimbel's department store. And then she was able to move to a bigger apartment. And my brother and I could leave the home. And we were able to join her. And there, I was a teenager by then, and I conditioned my own hair. Wow. This is a facsimile. And I remember years later reading Malcolm X's autobiography, where he dyes his hair red, he bleaches it with these harsh, smelly chemicals, and well, I did the same thing. It all in the effort to find an identity. But living in New York at that time, it was the 50s, and it was known as the golden age of Broadway. And my mother took me to my first Broadway show, and I was hooked. There were these amazing productions, and I got active in community theater and off Broadway. And the first thing I did when I got a role was to find the hairstyle. I would capture the character with my hair. So if I played Amanda, and glass menagerie to capture her very controlling manner. I just rolled it in this tightly rolled bun, I had a whole range of different hairdos, and all the way to the end of the spectrum with Medea. I let it fly. Well, and then the most life-transforming production I saw on Broadway was with Julie Harris, and she played a teenager in Member of the Wedding. Unforgettable. And I was just transformed, and I wanted to be just like her. So her character is frustrated and feels she doesn't belong, and so she chops her hair in this horrible way. And I didn't play that role ever, but I chopped my hair. Because I wanted to be like her and be on Broadway. Well, finally, one summer I was in summer stock in Cape May, New Jersey, and at that time I bleached my hair blonde like Peggy Lee. Whoops. It should tilt more. In time we came to terms. I corralled you, to a degree. In Member of the Wedding, Julie Harris played Frankie. I cropped you close to my scalp, for Broadway beckoned me. Next, a pixie cut, bleached blonde like Peggy Lee, appeared in summer stock, showing versatility. A tightly rolled bun for Amanda's glass menagerie. For Medea, unraveled strands in Medusa-like snakes. Each role a new coiffure, each look a new take. Well, as luck would have it, I met my husband shortly after I just chopped my hair off. And eventually he let me know. He said, "Never, never, never cut your hair." Then, receding hair husband did decree, hair is a treasure, to cut it folly. Keep it copious, don't let it peter. Never cut a single centimeter. Well, after that, for the 23 years we were married, I never cut my hair, not even a trim. And this is, I painted that just remembering how I felt my hair was just going on and on and on. Well, I met my husband. He was in New York City. He was from Yakima, Washington. And at that time, I had no intention of ever leaving New York. It was my town. But through a series of unfortunate incidents, my life took a very sharp turn, and off the course that I thought it was on. My mother and stepfather were violently killed in an auto accident. And my best friend and roommate, Patricia, who shared my passion for theater, and we would even go to auditions together, she came and said, "You know, I'm really sorry. I know it's a terrible time, but Steve and I are getting married and we're going to move to his hometown." And it was the coldest winter on record. Well, somehow or other, I found myself married to this very attentive and very persuasive man, and following him to Washington State, where we spent our first summer on in a remote cabin on a Forest Service lookout, high on the edge of a 6-foot cliff called Jump Off, putting out fires for the Mount Rainier Forest Service. Well, we had no heat, no electricity, wood stove, oil lamp, fetch water down the mountain a ways. This was quite a change for this New York City girl. I was used to speed, and I had to learn to slow down. Well, eventually, eventually I started to notice the subtle things of nature, these little violet flowers that grew right out of dry rock. And there were times that seemed magical, like we were floating on the clouds, because when you looked below the cabin, there was nothing but fog. So I was really getting close to nature, and that might explain what happened next. It was getting toward the end of summer, getting chilly, and almost time for us to go down. And I remember one morning waking up groggy and felt something tugging at my hair. So I reached up and I looked in my hand, and there was this tiny pink creature, a newborn baby mouse. I know. I was so amazed. And the most amazing thing was that I didn't scream, I didn't freak. If this had been New York City, you know I would have. But he actually was so cute. I guess his mother must have thought my wild bushy top made a perfect warm nest for her. Oh, but you know, you are really cute, and you look just like a toy, but you can't stay. No way. Well, I had to paint a picture remembering what that was like. So eventually, we, after a while, my husband and I, we ended up both teaching in government schools for the next 10 years in very exotic cultures. The first place we went was northern Arizona, where we taught the Hopi, and this is a facsimile of, I had to copy the Hopi maiden traditional hairdo, and then we also taught the Navajo, so alternately I would put it in braids. These are composites, not my hair. After Arizona, we taught in an Eskimo village on the coast, and then an even more remote village in the middle of the Bering Sea, an Arctic island where it got 50 below zero. Wow. After that, we went to a tropical island of Taiwan. And there I really couldn't blend in. But I overheard a Taiwanese woman telling her friend, she said, you know, I think she's Japanese. Because in the north, they wear their hair up high like that. Who knew? So then from there, across the globe to Morocco. And everywhere we stayed only the school year, and then we would pack our bags and go on to the next assignment. So the next place we went was Seville, Spain. Woo, that's right. And then I dug in my heels. I said, I don't want to move anymore. I was having too much fun. We would go to parties where we met all these really fun people, writers, painters, and we lived just outside of Seville in a little town, and right next door was a gypsy settlement with these wonderful gypsy musicians. They're flamenco guitarists, singers, dancers, and I became an aficionada. I was passionate about flamenco. And we would get invited to these all-night huergas, where they'd start after midnight and not end till early morning. And so, because I dug in my heels, I managed for us to stay for 3 years instead of 1. And that allowed me every afternoon after I taught my class, I'd rush down into the bowels of Seville, into those little winding streets to a little wooden shack, and there I would take private flamenco dance lessons. And I would tap my feet to the flamenco beat, and I'd toss my long straightened hair to that flamenco beat, ole. Anyway, that was great fun, but it couldn't last. My restless husband had to move on. and he decided that he would take us to Berkeley in 1968. Well, you can imagine, it was the most exotic place we'd been yet. I mean, women walking topless in the streets, and slogans every time you turned around, make love, not war, and power to the people. And we stayed long enough there. Actually, we stayed quite a while, quite a long time, and so that allowed me to make some good women, longtime women friends. And I was really, my consciousness was raised by the women's lib movement and some really good friends who made me aware that of my conditioning in the 1950s, where women always deferred to the men, but not in Berkeley. So, Berkeley in the 60s, and Afro, of course. With my heritage, no need to be forced. Borrowing and claiming cultures for my own. You bet I couldn't leave you alone. Once a hated source of shame became an ever-amusing game. Aside from a chameleon empathy, you helped me find my identity. Yes. So with the help of some very loyal friends who stayed with me through my consciousness raising, I was finally able to liberate myself and get a divorce. And after the divorce, out came the shears. Never been trimmed in 23 years. What's the first thing any woman would do? Cut it short to feel like new. Yes. And I realized that I had mimicked my mother's act of self-liberation. When she married, she had hair long enough to sit on. Yes, her Portuguese hair. And she divorced my father, moved to New York City, and then she wanted to be a new woman, and she gave herself a flapper's bob. And she felt like new. And I did the same. So after the, in this wonderfully supportive Berkeley atmosphere, and with all these, finally, some supportive women friends who I will always be grateful for, I ended up teaching in Berkeley for 25 years. I'd already taught abroad for 10. And I had taught all the grades from kindergarten through 8th, ESL, Spanish bilingual. I was a drama teacher. But finally, I got great satisfaction because I was a multicultural resource specialist. And then I would produce multicultural assemblies for Martin Luther King Jr. High School. And every month, all the programs were to celebrate diversity. And I came with all the support to appreciate my diversity, my multicultural self. And I was grateful. I was grateful for my hair. So I have made peace with my hair. And that's the story of my hair. But I wish all of you untangled hair and untangled lives.